My name is Liam. Listen carefully to my story. Please do not miss any part. This is not just a story, it is a feeling. It will touch your heart, make you feel many emotions, and in the end, it will give you something beautiful to think about. I was always alone. From the time I was little, I felt different. I did not have many friends. At school, I sat at the back of the class, quiet, almost invisible. When the bell rang, other kids laughed and ran outside, but I slowly walked home by myself. At home, things were no different. My parents were always busy. My father came home late, tired from work. My mother was always on the phone, talking to clients. They were good people, but they did not have much time for me. I ate my meals alone, did my homework alone, and fell asleep alone. I wanted to tell someone how I felt, but I did not know how. I kept everything inside. I smiled in front of others, but cried in my room when no one was watching. One day, after school, I walked to the park. I sat on a bench and watched the people around me. I saw a family having a picnic. The mother was feeding her little girl, and the father was throwing a ball to his son. They were laughing together. I felt a deep pain in my chest. I wanted that kind of love. I wanted someone to sit with me, talk with me, and care for me. I wanted to be seen. Suddenly, I felt something cold on my hand. I looked down. A small dog with golden fur was licking my fingers. His eyes were bright and curious. "Hey, buddy," I whispered softly. The dog wagged his tail and rested his head on my lap. I stroked his soft fur. For the first time in a long time, I felt warm inside. I looked around. "Where is your owner?" I asked the dog, but there was no answer, of course. I waited, thinking someone would come looking for him, but no one did. The dog stayed with me. He followed me when I walked. He sat beside me when I stopped. When I finally left the park, he walked with me all the way home. I stood in front of my house, unsure what to do. My parents would never allow me to keep a dog. "Go back, little one," I said softly. "You don't belong here." But the dog just sat there, looking at me with sad eyes. I sighed and sat on the front steps. The dog curled up beside me. I stared at the sky as the sun slowly began to set. The colors were soft, pink and orange. I did not feel alone. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had someone with me. I named him Max. I did not know why. It just felt right. Max became my secret friend. Every day after school, I would go to the park, and he would be there, waiting for me. He would run to me, his tail wagging so fast it made me laugh. I would sit under a tree, and he would lay his head on my lap. Sometimes I talked to him about my day. Sometimes I just sat quietly, and he stayed close, as if he knew I did not want to be alone. One rainy afternoon, I came to the park, but Max was not there. I called for him, but he did not come. I ran around, looking everywhere. My heart started to race. "Max! Where are you?" I shouted. I searched for hours, but he was nowhere. I felt the familiar sting in my chest, the same pain I felt every time I was left alone. That night I sat on my bed, staring at the wall. My eyes burned with tears. I had lost my only friend. The next morning, I skipped school. I went back to the park, walking slowly, my head down. I was about to leave when I heard a faint whimper. I turned and saw Max lying near a tree. His fur was wet, and he was shaking. I ran to him. "Max!" I cried. I knelt beside him and hugged him tightly. "I was so scared. Where were you?" He licked my face weakly. He was hungry and tired, but he was happy to see me. I carried him home, not caring about what my parents would say. When I entered the house, my mother saw me holding Max. Her eyes widened. "Liam, what is this?" she asked, her voice sharp. But before I could answer, my father came into the room. He saw Max, and for the first time he smiled. A real soft smile. "Where did you find him?" my father asked. I explained everything. The park, the loneliness, and how Max had become my friend. I told them how empty I had felt before he came into my life. I could not stop the tears from falling. My father looked at me for a long moment, then knelt down beside me. He stroked Max's head gently. "He can stay?" my father said softly. I looked up in shock. "Really?" My mother was quiet for a moment. Then, she slowly walked over and crouched beside me. She placed her hand on mine and gave a small nod. Tears filled my eyes again, this time not from sadness but from relief. For the first time, my parents were truly looking at me. They saw my heart. From that day on, Max became a part of our family. He brought us closer. My parents started coming home earlier. We spent more time together. My mother laughed more. My father played with Max like a child. And slowly, I was not alone anymore. One night, as I lay in bed with Max sleeping beside me, I realized something. I had spent so much time thinking I was alone, but I was not. I just needed to let love in. So, my dear listener, if you ever feel alone, remember this. You are never truly alone. Sometimes love comes in the form of a person, sometimes in a furry friend, and sometimes in the most unexpected places. And if this story touched your heart, do not forget to like and subscribe, because I will share more stories that will make you feel, think, and believe in love a little more every day. And remember, no one is ever truly alone. As the days passed, Max became more than just my friend. He became my family. Every morning he woke me up by jumping on my bed and licking my face. His tail wagged so fast, it was as if he was saying, "Wake up! It's a new day! Let's be happy!" And somehow, I was. I was happier than I had been in a long time. After school, I didn't rush home to hide in my room anymore. Instead, I ran to the park and Max ran beside me. We played fetch, rolled in the grass, and lay under the sky. When I was tired, Max rested his head on my lap, and I felt at peace. But the best part was seeing the change in my family. My father, who was once always tired and quiet, now smiled more. When he came home from work, he didn't go straight to his room. Instead, he sat on the floor with Max, throwing a ball and laughing when Max chased after it. My mother, who was once always on her phone, started cooking real meals again. One evening, I walked into the kitchen and saw her humming softly as she cut vegetables. I couldn't remember the last time I'd heard her hum. "Smells good," I said softly. She turned and smiled. "Your favorite soup? It's been a while, huh?" Her voice was gentle, softer than it had been in years. We ate dinner together that night. My father sat at the table, not on the couch in front of the TV. My mother put her phone away. Max lay under the table, his tail thumping against the floor happily. I looked at my parents and realized I wasn't invisible anymore. They were seeing me. We were together, truly together. That night, as I lay in bed with Max snuggled close, I whispered, "Thank you for finding me, Max." He opened his eyes slightly, let out a sleepy sigh, and placed his paw on my hand. My heart was full. Weeks passed, and everything felt brighter. My family started going on walks together. My father and I threw a ball for Max, while my mother laughed as Max clumsily tried to catch it. We started going to the park on weekends, just the three of us and Max. One afternoon, while we were walking, I noticed a man sitting on a bench. He looked tired. His clothes were a bit dirty, and he stared at the ground with empty eyes. Max suddenly stopped and stared at the man. Then, without warning, he ran over to him. "Max!" I called, but he didn't stop. The man looked up in surprise, as Max jumped onto the bench and placed his paws on his lap. At first, the man seemed unsure. He stared at Max, then slowly lifted his hand and stroked his head. To my surprise, the man smiled. A small, tired smile, but a smile nonetheless. We walked over. "I'm so sorry," I said quickly, feeling embarrassed, but the man shook his head. "No, it's okay. He's a sweet dog." His voice was rough but kind. I noticed he had tears in his eyes. "Are you okay?" I asked softly. The man glanced at me, then looked down at Max, still petting him. He didn't answer for a moment. Then he said softly, "I lost my wife 2 years ago. We used to come to this park every Sunday. She loved dogs. After she passed away, I stopped coming here. But today, I just wanted to remember her." My heart ached. I looked at him, at his tired eyes and the sadness in his voice. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. The man shook his head and smiled faintly. "No need to be sorry. No. When your dog ran up to me for a moment, I felt like she was here, like she was smiling at me through him." I blinked back tears. Max sat beside the man, resting his head on his knee. It was as if Max knew exactly what the man needed. Love. We sat with him for a while. My father talked to him about his wife, and my mother shared stories about Max. The man laughed a little, his voice soft and warm. Before we left, the man looked at Max and then at me. "Thank you," he said softly, "for sharing your friend with me." I smiled. No, it was Max's idea. As we walked away, I looked at Max and my heart swelled with love. He had not only saved me, he was saving others too. with nothing but his soft eyes and his gentle heart. He was spreading love. That night I sat by my window looking at the stars. Max lay beside me, his head on my feet. I whispered softly, "You're not just a dog, are you? You're an angel." Max wagged his tail slightly in his sleep as if he had heard me. In the days that followed, I saw the man again. He was no longer sitting alone. He was talking to others in the park, walking with them and even smiling. And sometimes, when he spotted us, he would wave at Max. The man was no longer alone. Neither was I. And then one day something surprising happened. My father came home with a small box. He called me into the living room. "Open it," he said. I slowly lifted the lid. Inside was a silver tag with Max's name on it. My eyes widened. "For Max," my father said softly, "because he belongs with us, officially." I could not hold back my tears. I ran to my father and hugged him tightly. My mother joined us, and Max jumped excitedly around us, wagging his tail. For the first time in my life, I did not feel alone. I felt loved. I felt seen. I felt whole. So, my dear listener, if you ever feel alone, remember this: love finds us in the most unexpected ways. Sometimes it comes as a kind hand, sometimes as a gentle word, and sometimes it comes as a dog with golden fur and a heart full of love. As the seasons changed, so did my life. The boy who once walked home alone with his head down was now running home with a wide smile on his face, eager to be with his family. And Max, our little home, which once felt cold and quiet, was now filled with warmth and laughter. My father, who used to be too tired for conversation, would come home early and call out, "Where's Max?" before even taking off his shoes. My mother, who once buried herself in work calls, now spent her afternoons in the backyard, throwing a ball for Max while she and my father shared stories and laughter. And me? I was no longer invisible. I didn't hide in my room anymore. I didn't keep my feelings locked inside. Max had opened my heart, and with it, he had opened my whole world. One evening, as the sun was setting and the sky turned into soft shades of pink and gold, I sat on the grass with Max. My parents were nearby, sitting on the porch talking softly and holding hands. I watched them and smiled. It felt like I was seeing them for the first time, as two people who once loved each other deeply, but had somehow drifted apart. And now, piece by piece, they were finding their way back to each other. I ran my fingers through Max's golden fur and whispered, "You're a miracle, Max. You healed me. And somehow you're healing them too." Max let out a soft, content sigh, as if he understood. That night, after dinner, my father walked into my room. He stood at the door for a moment, then slowly walked over and sat beside me on the bed. "Liam," he said softly, his voice a little shaky, "I need to tell you something." I turned to him, unsure of what he was about to say. He let out a slow breath and looked down at his hands. "I wasn't always like this," he began. "I used to be different. happier, warmer. But somewhere along the way I got lost. I frowned slightly. What do you mean? He stared at the floor for a moment, then looked at me. His eyes were tired but filled with sadness and love. When you were little, he continued softly, I used to sit by your bed every night. I would tell you stories until you fell asleep. And when you had bad dreams, I held your hand until you felt safe again. But as the years passed, life became heavy. Work, bills, and worries. And I forgot how to be your dad. My chest tightened. I had spent so many nights feeling unseen, not knowing that he had been carrying his own silent pain. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice cracking. I'm so sorry for being away, even when I was right here. I felt tears sting my eyes. Without saying a word, I reached out and hugged him tightly. His arms wrapped around me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like a little boy again, safe in his father's arms. And in that moment, I realized something. Sometimes, the people we think have left us are still there. They're just lost in their own darkness, waiting for someone or something to bring them back. And Max had done that for us. After that night, everything changed. My father and I started talking more. He would ask me about my day, and I would tell him about school, about my silly adventures with Max, and about the small things that made me smile. My mother, too, became softer. She began spending less time on her phone and more time with us. She started leaving little notes in my lunchbox, just like she used to when I was small. Notes that said, I love you and I'm proud of you. One Saturday morning, my father suggested we take Max for a hike. I was surprised. My father had never been the let's go on a family adventure type. But that day, we packed some sandwiches, grabbed Max's leash, and drove out to a nearby trail. The forest was beautiful. The trees were tall and full, and the air smelled of pine and fresh earth. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, creating soft golden patches on the path. As we walked, Max ran ahead, barking excitedly at every butterfly and squirrel he saw. My parents laughed together, holding hands and sharing old memories. I walked beside them, feeling lighter than I had in years. At one point, we came to a clearing with a small pond. The water was still and clear, reflecting the sky like a mirror. My father pulled off his shoes, rolled up his pants, and waded into the water with Max splashing around him. My mother sat on a rock, watching them with a smile that lit up her whole face. She turned to me and patted the space beside her. I sat down, and she gently took my hand in hers. Liam, she said softly, I want you to know something. I turned to her. What is it? She squeezed my hand gently. You saved us? I blinked in surprise. Me? She nodded. Yes, you. You never gave up on us. Even when we were too busy and too lost, you stayed. You held on, and you brought Max into our lives, and Max, well, he brought us back together. I felt a lump in my throat. I looked at her. at my father laughing in the water with Max, and I realized she was right. For so long, I had felt small and alone. I had believed that no one saw me. But I was wrong. My love had been quietly holding my family together, even when I didn't know it. That night, as I lay in bed with Max snuggled beside me, I stroked his fur softly. "You saved us, Max," I whispered. "But you also showed me that I was never really alone. You just helped me see the love that was already there." Max let out a content sigh and nuzzled his nose into my chest. And so, my dear listener, if you ever feel invisible, if you ever feel alone, remember this: you are never truly alone. Love is sometimes quiet. It sometimes hides behind tired eyes, behind busy hands, or behind broken hearts. But it is always there. You just have to keep believing in it. And if this story touched your heart, do not forget to like and subscribe, because there are more stories to come. Stories that will make you feel, dream, and love a little more each day. And always remember, love is all around you. You just have to open your heart and see it. As the weeks turned into months, my life blossomed in ways I never imagined. I no longer felt like the quiet boy sitting alone in the corner. I smiled more. I spoke more. My heart, once heavy with loneliness, was now light and open. At school, something surprising happened. People started noticing me, not because I was louder or different, but because I was braver. I began talking to my classmates, sharing small jokes and stories about Max, and slowly, friendships started to bloom. One day, during lunch, a boy named Ethan sat beside me. He was shy and quiet, just like I used to be. He barely made eye contact and kept his head down. "Hey," I said softly, offering him a piece of my sandwich. "Do you want some?" He looked at me with surprise. "Oh, no thanks," he muttered. I smiled and shrugged. "Okay, but I have to warn you, it's pretty delicious." He glanced at me and gave a tiny smile, almost too small to notice, but it was there. I saw it. For the next few days, Ethan kept sitting next to me. We didn't talk much at first, but day by day he grew more comfortable. One afternoon, as we sat quietly in the cafeteria, he suddenly said, "You know, I used to have a dog too." I turned to him, curious. "Yeah?" He nodded slowly, staring at the table. His name was Toby. He was my best friend. His voice was soft, almost a whisper. But he passed away last year. I saw the pain in his eyes, the same pain I once carried. "I'm really sorry, Ethan," I said gently. He shrugged, trying to act like it didn't matter. But I could see the sadness he was trying to hide. "Hey," I said softly, "do you want to meet Max sometime? He's pretty great at making sad hearts feel better." Ethan's eyes flickered with surprise. "Really?" "Yeah," I smiled. "And he's a big fan of belly rubs. He'll probably love you right away." For the first time, Ethan smiled. A real smile. Not a small one, but a genuine, bright smile. And in that moment, I knew that Max's love wasn't just for me. It was meant to be shared. That weekend, Ethan came over. When he walked into my backyard, Max ran straight to him, barking happily and wagging his tail. Ethan laughed. A sound so genuine and pure, I knew Max had already begun to heal him too. As they played, I watched from the porch. My mother came outside holding 2 glasses of lemonade. She handed me one and sat down beside me. She smiled softly as she watched Max and Ethan. "You've changed, Liam," she said. I turned to her, raising an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Her eyes were warm and kind. "You're not just carrying your own heart anymore," she said, her voice gentle. "You're carrying others too." Her words made me pause. I hadn't realized it, but she was right. The boy who once felt invisible was now reaching out to others, offering kindness, offering friendship. That evening, when Ethan left, he turned to me and said, "Thank you. For today. For Max." I smiled. "You can come back whenever you want. Max would love it." Ethan's eyes were bright with something I knew too well, hope. After he left, I sat on the back steps with Max beside me. The sun was setting, painting the sky with soft pinks and golds. I stroked Max's fur and whispered, "You did it again, buddy. You saved someone else." He wagged his tail softly and rested his head on my knee as if to say, "That's what I'm here for." And as I sat there, I realized something. I was no longer afraid of being alone, because I knew now that even when we feel alone, we are still surrounded by love. Sometimes it comes in the form of a family we can't see at first. Sometimes it comes in the form of a friend. And sometimes it comes in the form of a golden dog with kind eyes and a tail that never stops wagging, a say. The months passed. Max became known at the park as the dog with a magic heart. People smiled when they saw him. Children ran to him, giggling and throwing sticks. Strangers crouched beside him and stroked his fur, and somehow their eyes always looked softer afterward, less tired, more hopeful. One afternoon, while Max and I were walking through the park, I saw the same man we had met months ago, the one who had lost his wife. He was sitting on a bench, but this time he wasn't alone. Beside him sat a woman with kind eyes. They were holding hands, and he was smiling. A soft, genuine smile. When he saw Max, he waved and called out, "Hey, buddy!" Max ran over to him, tail wagging excitedly. The man crouched down, and for a moment he hugged Max, burying his face in his fur. When he stood up, he smiled at me. "I found her again," he said softly, glancing at the woman beside him. "I was afraid I'd never feel love again, but because of Max, I knew it was still out there." Tears stung my eyes. I smiled, unable to speak. I simply nodded. As we walked away, Max trotted happily beside me, his ears flopping with every step. I bent down and kissed his head. "Do you know what you've done, Max?" I whispered softly. "You've given love back to the world." And in that moment, I knew that Max was not just my dog. He was hope. He was light. He was a reminder that no matter how lost or broken we feel, there is always a way back to love. So, my dear listener, if you are ever walking alone, if your heart feels heavy, or if the world seems too big and too empty, remember Max. Remember that love can find you in the most unexpected places. Sometimes it comes with kind eyes and gentle hands. Sometimes it comes with laughter shared between old friends. And sometimes it comes with 4 paws, golden fur, and a tail that wags with endless joy. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe, because there are more stories to come. Stories that will remind you to keep believing in kindness, in hope, and in the beautiful magic of love. Max ran over to him, tail wagging excitedly. The man crouched down, and for a moment he hugged Max, burying his face in his fur. When he stood up, he smiled at me. "I found her again," he said softly, glancing at the woman beside him. "I was afraid I'd never feel love again. But because of Max, I knew it was still out there." Tears stung my eyes. I smiled, unable to speak. I simply nodded. As we walked away, Max trotted happily beside me, his ears flopping with every step. I bent down and kissed his head. "Do you know what you've done, Max?" I whispered softly. "You've given love back to the world." And in that moment, I knew that Max was not just my dog. He was hope. He was light. He was a reminder that no matter how lost or broken we feel, there is always a way back to love. So, my dear listener, if you are ever walking alone, if your heart feels heavy, or if the world seems too big and too empty, remember Max. Remember that love can find you in the most unexpected places. Sometimes it comes with kind eyes and gentle hands. Sometimes it comes with laughter shared between old friends. And sometimes it comes with 4 paws, golden fur, and a tail that wags with endless joy. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe, because there are more stories to come. Stories that will remind you to keep believing in kindness, in hope, and in the beautiful magic of love.